Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the 1 o'clock session of the 2020 Virtual Kentucky K12 Technical Summit. And we have here on track one today, we have an awesome panel that is going to be discussing technology planning, finances, and legal issues. There's always a lot of great discussion that happens around there, and we're really excited about this panel that we have in this discussion today. As always with this, make sure that you put those questions or comments that you have or anything that you would like to add to the conversation in the YouTube live chat. We've got Mr. Mike Smith monitoring the YouTube live chat, and he'll break in with questions throughout the session. Also, anything that you would like to tweet or comment on Twitter, you can hit the hashtag KYTex while you're on Twitter as well. So we really appreciate you being with us today. As I announced a minute ago on the other session, if you weren't with us, you may have a little trouble with the ELA certificates. I have gotten a couple of your emails. We have record of that request in the Google form, and we'll make sure that those ELA certificates get sent out to you for those sessions that you may have had trouble with. So there will be another exit survey at the end of this session, and we'll put that link up at the very end. Just like in the earlier sessions, we will also post the Google Meet link in the YouTube live chat when this session wraps up at 1:45. So that way, if you have other questions or conversations that you would like to continue with the panelists, you can do that during the 15-minute break. So again, thank you all for being with us today. And so I'm going to turn it over to the panel, and you guys can take it away. Thank you so much. Diana,
all right.
You want to kick us off?
Sure, I'll kick us off. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So glad that you're joining us on this wonderful Monday afternoon, and I appreciate the ERATC group for inviting me to be part of this panel. We also have with us Rhonda. Rhonda, will you pipe in and tell us hello?
Just unmuted. See, I'm acting like you, Neil. I'm Rhonda Thompson. I'm the District Technology Coordinator for Jackson County Public Schools.
And Brandon?
Brandon Blackburn, Co-District Technology Coordinator, Advanced Technology Teacher at Pikeville Independent Schools, and soon to join Diana as an alumni of KISTI Presidency soon.
Awesome. Well, today we're going to start off with a financial discussion. The topic of this session involves legal as well as technology planning, but I'm going to kick us off with a financial. And so let me share my screen. And if you were on our KISTI, speaking of KISTI, if you were on our KISTI Fall Virtual Summit this year, you probably saw some of this presentation. I am going to share with you, especially if you're a new CIO, I'm going to share with you some information, but please don't worry about jotting any of this down. If you want this information after the fact, just email me, and I will be glad to share everything that I've shared in this presentation. I've called it Budgeting 101, Making Sense of Munis, because munis can be a scary creature. And I am, for 47 more days, the Director of Technology and Information in the Fort Thomas Independent Schools. I am retiring at the end of July. I've been working 35 years in the profession, and folks, I'm tired. I'm looking to do some fun stuff that we don't get to do when we're working all the time. But I've listed there some information on how you can connect with me, because I do want to stay in touch with my Kentucky Tech friends. So please connect with me. You've got my blog, my new personal email account, and my new professional email account, and my personal email account as well as my Twitter handle. Okay, full disclosure, I am not an expert. I've been the part of the technology department in Fort Thomas for 22 years, and I'm still not an expert. But one thing I am is I'm a huge data nerd. I always have been. So if you relate to that title, then you might really enjoy what I'm going to share with you today. And here's a few things that are proof that I'm a big data nerd. I've had a checking account since I was 14. My parents thought that was really important back then for me to learn financial literacy. So when I was in 8th grade, they took me to the local bank there in Liberty, Kentucky, because I grew up in Casey County, and opened a checking account in my name. And they taught me how to reconcile my checkbook. And I still to this day reconcile to the penny every month. I know that's a lost art. There are people who do that for you now, but I still enjoy doing that every month to make sure that I am noting every expense and making sure that our accounts at home balance. And one of the reasons is bullet number 3, I'm married to a CPA. So both of us are data nerds. And full transparency, confession, when I started as the technology director in Fort Thomas, my husband is the one that helped me with some of this financial stuff. So I lean on him. It's great to have someone in the house who you can lean on. But here's your tip for today. Find the person in your district that you can lean on. Become best friends with your chief financial officer. This is really important. In our district, he is a couple doors down from me, so it's really easy. But in a large district, this might not be quite as easy. So I encourage you to seek out the person in your district who is the munis master and become friends with that person, because understanding the munis codes can be very confusing. I put in here that sometimes it's Greek to me, and it took me a year or so to understand what all of those digits mean. We're going to look at each section individually, but I do want to show you here in a collective screen how these codes interact with each other. But we are going to go through them separately, so hang on. But the first 3 is your location code. The next one is your fund code, and then an org code. And those 7 digits stay together. Then they're separated by a dash from the object code, which is your next 4 digits. And then another dash and your project code. And the project code, you'll find out as we continue here, is not used for every single transaction or every single purchase. It's a special code. So, but those first 11, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 codes, those are needed for every single entry that your financial officer puts into munis. So let's break it down. The first 3, like I said, are your location code. Now, if you see a purchase that was made with 000 as the first 3 numbers as the location code, that means that purchase was made for the entire district. 001 means the district office. Then you're going to see, and I didn't list all of our school codes, but every building in your district is going to have a code. So in our district, it's 020 for one of our elementaries, and then 030 for another one, 040 for another one, etc. So you're going to ask your financial officer what those 3 codes are. What are the location codes for every building in our district? And this will help you understand purchases that are made if you know which location code is used. Now, the difference between entire district and district office is a 001 is actually a purchase that is made just for the district office. So let's think of, let's think of a printer you're going to purchase for your payroll officer. Okay, so if you're purchasing a printer for your payroll officer and that printer is going to sit in the payroll office, in the central office, then you're going to use 001. But let's say you're going to purchase a software product that every student in the district is going to use, you're probably going to want to use 000 because it affects everyone in the district. All right. The next number, that 4th slot there, is your fund number. And that number is going to be either a 1 or a 2. If it is a 1, then that means it's part of the general fund. Now, the general fund is the money that your district accumulates or is provided by the SEEK formula, basically. That is that's a fund that closes out every June 30th at the end of the fiscal year, and it begins new every July 1. Your your finance officer works with your auditors and does some reporting at the end of the year on this fund, but this is known as the general fund, and it comes with a 1. So if you see a purchase that is 000 entire district, and then the next digit is a 1, then that means it was paid out of what's called the general fund. If that fourth digit in a purchase code is a 2, then that means it is either from a federal or a state fund. And I've got some examples there of what I mean. So a federal fund is something like Perkins, okay? And you've heard that fund, you might have heard that fund name before. What Perkins is, it's a federal fund that has to be, most federal funds, the money has to be spent within 2 years and 3 months. Now, there are some exceptions, and Perkins is one of those exceptions because that money needs to be spent yearly. If it's not a federal fund, then it could be a state fund. For example, KETS. So if that fourth digit is a 2, it could be either federal or state. And one of the state funds that is an example is our KETS money. And most state funds have to be spent within a year and 2 months, but there are some exceptions to that. And KETS is an exception because technically your KETS money never ends. It rolls over from 1 year to the next. Now you have to zero out the year that you're in. You have to zero it out, but you can transfer that money to the new KETS fund, so it technically never ends. All right, so we've covered location and fund, and now we're up to the next 3, which is your org. And in my opinion, this is the same as a program. For example, technology is 013 in that 4th, 5th, and 6th. No, that's not 4th. That's 5, 6, and 7 digits. And so your finance officer, your director of finance, will have a list of what all those program or org codes are. And I want to show you an example of this list. So I asked our finance officer to give me a list of all the org codes, and he pulled this down from KDE website. So these resources are out there if you need to find them. There's an example of one. Here's an example of another page that he gave me. And then here's an example of of a different file that has a lot of the federal grants. So those numbers here, nobody's expected to memorize them, but ask your finance officer where you can find them. But you might want to commit to memory that technology is 013. So if you're making a purchase for the entire district and you're going to use your technology general fund money, those first 7 digits would be 0001 general fund and then 013. That's a series of numbers that you do probably want to commit to memory. And if you want to think of it as 0001013, that's an easy way to remember it. But really, the 1, that 4th digit, is separate because that's your general fund. Okay, the next 4 are they denote your object code, and your object defines what type of expenditure you're making. And so, for example, I've got 4 on there that are pretty familiar. 0580 is travel. So if you're paying for someone to go to a professional development, you would use 0580 for that. 0650 is supplies. 0734 is like technology in such as equipment, printers, laptops, etc., Chromebooks. 0735 is more like software purchases. So that's your object code. So again, if you're making a purchase, let's say you're going to buy a BrainPop subscription for the entire district, you would code that to 000 That's your entire district. Fund 1, so that'd be 1, and then 013 for technology, and then the hyphen 0735. That would be the code you would use for example of a software code purchase. And then the last one is, the last 4 digits is your project code. And that code is only used if you are using a state or federal program, if you're making a state or federal program purchase. For example, state projects begin with 1 in this a series of 4 numbers. If it's a state project, it's going to begin with a 1. So for example, our CETS money is 162, and then that letter at the end depends on which year we're in. And F was the 1920 school year, so I'm assuming that G will be the 2021 school year. If it's a federal project, those 4 digits would begin with either a 3, a 4, or a 5. For example, your Perkins codes are usually 348, and then something to denote the year, or 349 and something to denote the year. All right, I'm rushing through. I feel like I'm talking a mile a minute, but I want to get through in case we have time for questions, or we want to talk about planning and legal. So here's my second tip. My second tip is, don't rely on just munis reports to figure out what your balance is. When I took over the technology program, the person before me did that. He just relied on munis reports, and every 6 weeks or so, he'd have the finance officer print out a list of munis reports, and he would say, okay, well, here's how much money I have left. I am not that trustworthy to think that there aren't mistakes being made. So I decided to keep my own spreadsheet. And that's a tip that I'm giving you, because the advantage of having your own spreadsheet is you always know your balance. Just at a glance, you can find out how much money you have left in your general fund, your technology fund, and you can find out if your technology codes are being used without your knowledge. Now, not that anyone does that intentionally, but when it's being coded into munis, it would be really easy for someone to accidentally make a mistake and charge your technology budget. And I have found that throughout the years, not very often, but there have been some times when expenses were coded to the technology budget that should not have been. And so that way, if you keep your own spreadsheet and reconcile your munis reports every month, then you can figure out if there was a mistake made somewhere along the way. And then the third reason is that you can easily see historical expenses to use for budget planning. So when you are asked by your superintendent to come up with the technology budget for the next year, if you look at your spreadsheet and you have a history of your expenses, you can say, well, generally in this area, in this code 0580 travel, for example, we generally spend X amount of dollars. And so for next year's budget, we're going to increase that by 10%. And it gives you a good place to start for technology planning. I want to show you this spreadsheet. So this is the spreadsheet that my husband helped me create. Remember that friend at home that is a CPA? That one? He helped me create this many, many years ago, and then I just replicated each year. And this is the one from 2018-19. But what it does is it has a summary page that has all of the account codes here, what the beginning balance is, and at a glance, I can see how much I've used and how much I have available based on these tabs of expenses that I made throughout the year. And the highlighted part there in yellow was just my own system that I use when I looked at my munis spreadsheets to reconcile them. And that was just my code to tell me that, yes, that was in the munis spreadsheet. But at a quick glance, I can see my available balance. And this particular year, you can see that I spent more than I had, which it's easy to do when unexpected projects come up or when something happens and you have a repair cost you didn't expect. Now, what I did want to say is that if anyone would like that spreadsheet, I have a blank copy that I am more than willing to share with you. It has all of the links to the different tabs and the formula. If you are interested in that spreadsheet, please email me and I'll be glad to share it. I mean, you don't have to give me credit or anything because obviously I didn't create it, my husband did. So feel free to email me if you would like a copy of that spreadsheet. All right, I am going to stop sharing so I can see faces again because I lost faces somewhere along the way. There we go. And then I'd like to ask Brandon and Rhonda if they would share their videos and unmute to share some tips that they might have for tech planning, finances, or legal. And then we also have the infamous Jodi Rose on the call too, on the meeting too. He's famous for that session, How Not to Get Fired, for the legal side. So Jodi, if you wouldn't mind to share as well.
Rhonda, would you
I'll
like to
just
go first, please?
Okay. I was just, one thing that Diana said that really resonated with me because it just happened to me this week. It is very important to keep track of those munis reports because I had actually had something coded out of my budget. I was going to contribute like $2,000 for a software purchase, and they had actually taken $6,000 out of my code. And had I not been looking at those budgets on a regular basis, I would have never known that. So that's great. I love your spreadsheet. I never have got a chance to start using it, but I really want to because I think that's really important to keep that your own records so that you know exactly what's coming in and kind of going out. So love that. Brandon?
Well, I just love that we started out with budgeting first because, you know, if you kind of have an idea or a plan for your tech plan, it's really nice to know some of the feasibility and where the trends are of where money and how money is spent if you've never been around the table before. And so, you know, I have the opportunity with Ben and Neil to present a couple years ago about creating your table and developing that table and kind of guiding some of those conversations. But what an incredible insight that we have just now with what Diana's shown to help plan preemptively before you have an attack, you know, getting to see, again, how money is spent, you know, where money is not being spent. And, you know, it kind of also helps you guide some of the questions when you're looking to create that table. Who really needs to be around that table and who's in those need categories and who's benefited over the last few years in spending. And that way they can kind of share what's happened in their time. So all this is so relevant and so essential to the entire process. And, you know, if I have any advice, it's just to involve people, is try to even form your own table, if you will, because there's so much relevancy to what we're doing in all areas of instruction. Especially with NTI, it has revealed that stone has been turned over. And I'm just so appreciative of Diana, Rhonda, and everyone's wisdom in here that's been sharing it for a number of years because it is going to now have attention like it has never before. So thank you all very much.
One thing I meant to say, I forgot to say, is that this year, when our auditor came in, he looked at the expenses at the district level. And even though we were coding a lot of our software expenses to 000, the fact that we were coding them to 1013, so to the technology budget, which is a district fund, he said it looked, it made it look like the purchases were district heavy instead of actually spending them for the schools. So one of the things they were going to work on for this coming year, which I won't have to worry about, hashtag 47 days, is they were encouraging us to use the code. You can still use 000 because that's an expense you're making for everyone. And then you would still use 1 because it's a local fund budget, but you would use 118 instead of 013, which is more along the lines of school level instructional technology. And it didn't look like it was district office technology heavy. So that's a tip I meant to add in the presentation and I forgot. So 0001118 was another code that our auditor felt ought to be used for some of the software. And then you'd use 0735 as the last four, because that's a software purchase, especially if you're making purchases for the whole district.
And Diana, I'll throw something in there too. Sometimes we do those district purchases, you know, because we always get better pricing, and that's always great. But a lot of times we will still go in there and do those location codes at the beginning. And so that way we can really print out those reports that says, you know, how much did I spend at the high school and how much did I spend at the middle school? So we will break down those districts, and instead of using 000, we'll use like 020.
Yes.
And that kind of helps that. I need to have a question for you though, because I'm just curious how other people do it. Do you give your codes out to your schools so they do their own purchase orders, or do you do those purchase orders?
Well, we're small enough that I volunteered to do any purchase order that the schools want us to do, that I do it for them. I also use their codes. Like if they are paying for it out of a school budget, I'll code it to the school if they give me their code. But we do allow schools to do their own coding and their own ordering if they want. In a large district, I can't imagine that schools aren't making their own purchases. But we wouldn't give the district code to a school. But we do allow schools to use their own codes, like 020 or 030 at the beginning.
Yeah, so that's like me. I keep my kids' budget codes to myself, and any technology
Yes.
purchases they want, I do the PO, because
Yes.
like you, I'm from a small district, but I know other districts will go ahead and give those codes out to the school level. If they decide they want to buy Chromebooks, they'll buy Chromebooks.
Yes.
But I kind of keep that at my desk so that I can have a little bit more control over it. But
Yes.
they do other purchase orders like their title money or whatever that they've got.
Right. And there again is another example of becoming friends with your finance officer, because as a technology coordinator, I still think it's important for you to know what your schools are ordering. And so I would encourage you to just sit down with your finance officer and talk about, hey, if a purchase order comes through and it looks like it's technology, can you run it through me? Can you run it by me before you actually push the button and let it be ordered? Because in the past, we've had things that have been ordered that don't work with our network. And then you're stuck with a device that doesn't work. So if you're a new CIO out there, I encourage you to, as Brandon said, find a seat at that table, make friends with your finance officer so that you can avoid any of those purchases that might not be compatible with your network. Jodi, I see you're on. Do you have?
Diana, one thing I will add, I think is very important, especially for a new CIO, that if they are making those technology purchases, to make sure that they don't forget those commodity codes. So when we do the technology activity report, that all that funding that we're using, regardless if it's CATS or not, is reflected in that report, which is very, very important for our funding as well. And sometimes that's an easy thing to miss. Especially if, like, you know, maybe our finance officer is doing one for the district, not to put that code in there, and that's very, very important.
Agree.
Jodi?
Well, if you're going to call on me, Diana, then I am going to take this opportunity to just say thank you on behalf of the entire state for the resource that you have been, both within the districts in Northern Kentucky and then all across the state. I am
Thank you, Jodi.
On Twitter right now, lobbying for people to mount a groundswell of opposition to get you to agree to come back for a few years. But no, I don't begrudge anybody that's able to do that, and I wish you well, and I'm thankful that you can join us in things like today.
Thank you.
I do have a question for you all at the school district level, because when you put me on the spot with don't get fired stuff, and I start thinking planning and finance and legal, I mean, I can kind of just keep going and going. But I have a few districts that struggle from a planning perspective, where they just feel like they're kind of writing that in a vacuum. It doesn't have the same credibility in the district as the CDIP does. And so I would ask some of you districts that are on here, what advice do you give to that district that, frankly, we talk about getting at the table, maybe they're not at the table, or they feel like there is no table. And so just words of wisdom to those folks that just feel like they're out here trying to write a tech plan by themselves.
You know, I would start out and just say that, you know, there's a lot of ways to kind of creatively plant the seed, and I would say that you can start out by just working with groups like folks with STLP. You can work in getting involved in maybe forming smaller committees for purchases. You can even go all out and just go ahead and get both feet in the pool and just create a technology planning committee with some of your instructional folks that you've developed relationships with through things like STLP. And again, maybe you've been on smaller committees with, or maybe you bounce ideas off of each other and things like that. So that's really how we approached it, Neil and I, is that we started kind of small, working with folks. And as ARI was a good gateway for that, because we were forming smaller committees at that point and working with our instructional supervisors. So we were looking on how to spend money at that time and how to use that money wisely. And so, find the crack in the door, and then, bring as many people as you can to try to open it. And that's kind of would be my advice is, create a small table, and once it gets some traction, it becomes a pretty big table. And again, with NTI, I think everybody's wanting a seat at the table now.
And I would agree with that. I'm from the instructional side of technology, not the technical side. So I am really close to a lot of our instructional folks, our DAC, our instructional coach, our curriculum coordinator. So it's really nice to have those good relationships with those people so that you are invited to the table. But I'm also part of the CDIP planning process as well. So I'm just naturally in our district, because we are so small, I'm naturally included in that. So in some districts, that's not an option, I know, but it's very important that you kind of just make yourself at the table if you can, especially as Brandon said, and then what we're doing now and the need for more devices and more training and more technology, we're going to have to be at this instructional table.
Well, it's funny because, Brandon mentioned the whole thing about devices, and that's what I have found some of my I'll call them the stragglers, maybe noticing, is that when people think tech planning, all they want to talk about is, well, do I need any new devices this year, right? And so I'm actually pretty glad that we went to the template that we have now that really essentially states that the devices are just one of several of those future-ready gears that we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about technology planning. It brings in things like data security and building partnerships and things like that, and professional development, et cetera.
That's a really great point, Jody, because if you were to take a look at our plan over the last, probably, I'll go as far as 5 years, but definitely the last 3 years, there are tens of, maybe even 100 line items in there. I don't know if there's quite that many, but there's a lot. And it seems like a whole lot. But devices probably take up 2 of those line items. I mean, maybe 3. And then there's 60 other line items that are a lot of different things. Now, of course, you got some little gimme line items in there, like purchasing or renewing leases on fibers and phone systems and stuff like that. But with the new template, and I can't say enough good things about the new template, how it allows people to focus or maybe even open their eyes to the web that all of this touches. It is just incredible, and it really sparks good conversations when you see the domino effect of devices, instruction, planning, the financial aspect. I mean, it's integrated in everything. The technology department is no longer, I think Chuck actually brought out, we're not on separate islands anymore. We're building bridges to all the islands, and actually the lands are starting to touch each other. And so it's pretty incredible time to be in the field that we're in right now.
And I would agree with that. With the new template, it kind of prompts conversations that we may not have had before, since it's around those gears. And so I'm a proponent for that, for the new tech plan template. I think it's great. I know Ben will like to hear that, but it does help to have those conversations in those committee meetings, because it kind of guides the conversation a little bit better.
Well, we've got Ben in here actually in the back end panel. If he wants to chime in, he certainly can. I would point out, and I'm sure you all would agree, and when you think about tech planning, if the only thing you can get people to talk about is refreshing devices and what are we going to do with infrastructure and things like that, I mean, that's a starting point. And so I've told my folks as we go over technology plans that I'd rather have 3 things that you're genuinely focused on and you think you can do, rather than 30 things that you're putting in just for fluff's sake, just to fill up some pages on a document. While I've got the floor, let me ask you all, shifting maybe to the legal side of it, with all of the talk around NTI, virtual instruction, and everything like that, what new things are running through your mind as you think about the challenges of instructing in a world that may have a lot more remote instruction involved?
Well, the one thing that I think a lot of us were faced with on March 16th was the fact that all of those companies, those software companies, were offering their products for free for a couple months to get you through the school year. And people were just latching on to that. And so one of the concerns that I had was student data privacy and security, and making sure that we were following all the SIPA and COPA laws. And I encourage any new CIO out there to make that part of your process and your tech plan, is to have something in place to where teachers need to vet, or hopefully you have digital learning coaches. Let the digital learning coaches vet the software, make sure it meets the guidelines of both SIPA and COPA, so that you don't find yourself in a legal situation.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that, and to kind of add to the title of this this session that we were going to talk on a little bit on legal, teachers were all over the place bringing digital tools, because when you take in consideration preschool through your 12th grade, and even some of your AP and your honors classes, and folks that are trying to even go into the collegiate level while they're in high school, I mean, the number of tools that we would have to vet, and the data privacy, people would get calls from sales folks, they would respond to emails, and people were taking 2, 3, 4, and 5 steps before it even made it to the technology department. And they were like, hey, can we do this? And it was like, wait a minute, I don't know these people. Or hey, I gave this person your phone number or email. They're going to be talking to you soon about this, because this works great for kindergarten, this works great for juniors in high school, or whatever. And so that was, a big deal there. And so it's going to be really interesting to see, especially if NTI gets announced in some formal way that it's going to continue. We had a blessing of having 9 weeks essentially with students before we went into this, and now we could potentially start without ever seeing a student face. So where will everyone go? So from the legal aspect, it's a big deal. And the other one, I'll say one more thing, is that a lot of our students who needed devices at home needed access as well. And I can't tell you the roads that we traveled down and brick walls we hit. What good is it to give a Chromebook to a student when they can't get access, or have no way of getting to a public area where folks were trying to provide access? All of the issues legally that you come into because you're providing them a connection, but not really. You're just providing them a means to get to something that's really not yours. You're not providing it. You just gave them a subscription access or whatever. So that's some other things to consider.
Jodi, Randy Bailey mentioned, and maybe you can discuss to this, what you think about the liability of trying to do any of this synchronous teaching methods. So where we're all online at one time, whether it be through video or what have you, what would be the liability there?
Well, I think also on the synchronous teaching issue there, Jodi, looking at what if we have a class of a few students who are also trying, if the teacher's trying to do something on camera with kids in the classroom, that kind of thing too.
Yeah, you're about to see some liability as I try to deal with a cat and a dog that are within camera shot just about right here. I'm about to have my own liabilities. So anytime anybody asks me about liability, I have to start with, I'm not a lawyer. And so it is very difficult, but the stock response that you get all the time is consult with your board attorney. I know that doesn't help districts a ton, but that is the stock response that we have to give on just about anything that involves legal. My first thought when you start getting into the synchronous models, and Marty and I have had some good conversations about this, where he's trying to educate me and direct me a little better, where I struggle in my mind to think about a scenario where it is a huge success when a teacher has 10 students in the room and another 10 that are watching virtually. And I really think one thing I've used with some folks recently is, just like if you're trying to get someone to get used to online collaboration tools like, Google Drive or OneDrive. Okay, well, step 1 is how do you save a file? How do you share a file? And step 2 is really how do you use that effectively as part of being a better worker, better teacher, better student. And it's the same way I think with a lot of the video-based instruction, as Diana mentioned. When March 16th hit, everybody, and I could name the tool and you could name it tool too, that everybody, let's go online video, right? And that's okay, as we've learned in some settings, but if your solution is let's get everybody on 6 hours of online video for all day long, like we're really missing the mark here. And so I think it's all about how to target. That's going to be the step two. And it's really going to take our tech leaders and our learning coaches to help people understand when to use a technology tool like this technology that we're using right now. As far as liabilities go, I mean, obviously you've got certain waivers with kids being on camera and things like that they probably sign off on to some extent, but I would be really concerned with, sharing information. I mean, being careful what you throw up on a screen there, that might have, any kind of privileged information or anything like that.
I would agree. I think that the fall is going to bring a lot of uncertainty, and I hate that word. We've been using it so much in the last 3 months, but it really will depend. A lot of things will depend on where we are going as far as legal and financial and tech planning. So I hope that you all have some good experiences in the fall. I hope that you'll get some answers in the next couple months on where you're going as a district. Neil, you got a couple minutes.
Yep. So I think we've handled the questions. Ron, did you all have any more questions or anything coming in?
No, Randy Bailey just says that Jodi may not be a lawyer, but he's full of opinions.
I'm glad you edited and put opinions on the end of that there, because it could have been anything at that
Could
point.
have been another word. That's right.
Appreciate Randy and everybody there. Yeah, it's kind of tough. I mean, I know we're running up against the clock here a little bit. From a finance perspective, I think in addition to all the great detail on how to code things, I would remind folks that all this CARES money, the ESSER, the GEAR, those work on 27-month funding cycles, just like other title programs. And so you're not in the wrong if you're a district that's kind of wanting to stand pat for a moment and figure out how you want to make best use of those funds. And so I've had at least one district I've talked to that has said, you know what, we're not as much of a need maybe for devices, for example, this year as we know we might be next year when a refresh cycle comes, or maybe we're more prepared for some sort of expansion. And so it's even though vendors might try to tell you differently, it's not money that has to be spent immediately. And so I think you just got to encourage people to be smart in how they use that, because it's very tempting to just rush into something, as you all know.
All right. Well, guys, thank you all so much for joining us today. And again, congratulations, Diana. And we hope to see you around, and especially as a past KISTI president and lifetime member, glad to still be able to connect with you. And I appreciate everyone being on here today. So make sure that you check out